This is the best intervalometer in the world right now. And it's a fact that that statement is false. Good morning everyone from my workspace and room. Pretending like I'm coming from somewhere, just sitting down and starting filming. YouTube world. Anyway, I'm sure you've seen some of my time lapses, maybe some aerial time lapses captured with my Mavic Mini, or time lapses captured from planet Earth with my DSLR. Now, if you know anything about time lapses, if you don't, I have a video on it, by the way. Please go check it out. Now, if you know anything about time lapses, you'd know that you need a bunch of images and then, they come together to form a time lapse. Now, you need a special device to help you capture those images at the correct times, at very consistent intervals. Now, some cameras has that built in, but most cameras don't. Now, I was in a situation where I wanted to start making time lapses, but I didn't have an intervalometer and I didn't want to spend money on an intervalometer, but I had an Arduino laying around. So I created an intervalometer. Okay, now let me just mention, if you want me to do a breakdown video on this remote, go into the software, show you exactly how it works, how the buttons and switches are wired up, everything, comment down below and I'll do an in-depth video on it. So yeah, and here it is. So a few just specs about it. It has two infrared LEDs in the front. It has an on and off switch. It has a button, and then it has a mode selection switch. It uses a 9-volt battery and an Arduino UNO. The range on it is about 10 meters. Depends on how bright the light is, infrared light. And the battery life, I would say you can do about 5 time lapses of 5 or 4 hours each. Maybe longer, maybe shorter, I'm not sure, I'm not exactly sure. Okay, so how I created it. First of all, I started with Arduino. I knew I had an Arduino and I knew I wanted to make a intervalometer. So I did some research on how I can trigger my Nikon D3200 to, take images. But I found out that for my camera, I need a very specific connector that I didn't have. So that plan was, not going to work. But then I also, realized that most consumer grade Nikon DSLRs have infrared receivers or sensors, and they are for infrared remote. So you can buy a small remote that you can just press a button on and it can trigger your camera. Now, yeah, you can buy these remotes, but it's only remote triggers and it's not intervalometers. They don't have timers inside that can be used for time-lapse photography. So, but I knew it was possible to trigger it through infrared. So I did some research on the language that the remote has to speak to the camera so that it triggers and take an image. And then I wrote some code for my remote to be able to execute it. So I got together my food box or lunch box, whatever you want to call it, an Arduino. I got a battery inside, and then I installed first just one infrared LED, an on and off switch, and a button. And the first version of this remote only had the button, so when you press the button it only triggers the camera to take an image. So that was the first version, but it's lacked the time-lapse feature. So the second version, so then I disconnected the button to get that out of the way, and then programmed in a delay between the shots in the software, of course, and then it worked. I could trigger my camera every 2 seconds, 4 seconds, whatever I set in the software. But the problem was it could only be set in the software at that stage, and I couldn't do it with my remote in the field somewhere, and that obviously was a big problem. So I first of all then brought back the, then give it a dual function where it has the button that it, functioned as previously. You press it and it takes an image. But then I added this switch that you can now switch over to time-lapse mode, and then it, takes that extra delay into consideration. But I still had a problem. I had the two modes now, but I still had to figure out a way to, be able to set the interval in the remote itself. Now, obviously, 3 switches is already quite a lot. I didn't want to add more switches and buttons and stuff. So I wanted to figure out a way to use the hardware already installed to be able to determine that interval. So it took me about a week to think of this, and my final version uses the button in the button mode as normal. Press it and it takes an image. But when you switch it over to time-lapse mode, it first starts off with no delay, so it like triggers the camera the whole time as fast as the camera can go. But then how you can change that interval, you can press the button, and for as long as you press the button, the Arduino keeps track of how long you're pressing it, and when you release it, it takes that that time code, or it takes that time and it puts it between the images. So then that is your interval. So that is my final remote that I have now. I wanted to have a feature where I can do exposure ramping, but that is like more than double as complicated as what is already here. And this already is quite complicated, the 2 modes, and especially when switched to the time-lapse mode where it has to monitor the button. I wanted to do an exposure ramp feature, but that would require more hardware and even more software. So, and now that I have my PC and DaVinci Resolve, I can do exposure ramping in DaVinci Resolve. Still have to figure out, if I do manual mode and do steps of exposure, if I can compensate for that in DaVinci Resolve. I'm not sure if I would be able to do that yet, but I think I will be able to do it. So yeah, that is my Arduino Intervalometer remote. If you want to, please comment, then I can go into the software and do a much more complicated in-depth video on how it is wired, how it actually works. If you wanted to see that, please comment down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Have fun shooting.